All right, welcome. This is now our second week of lecture. Last week we talked about everything that you see here. It was really Ken to give you a bit of a review, primarily foundational or review in total, just ways to think about drawing and beginning our process. What we'll be doing today is adding on to number 6 there, which is lighting. Again, if any of you are feeling frustrated that we're not in the paint yet, today we will. But as I mentioned last week, I'm always going to start out a week discussion with theory. So we're just going to talk about the ideas that are underneath the practice that we're emphasizing. And then the second part of our week's lecture is just going to be me demoing in paint, showing you the setup, and then just implementing these principles. And it's just much easier to communicate this with drawing, and then with the painting, you'll just see how it's done. So first things first, let's just do a review of everything we have here. I'm going to do this much faster since you have 2 videos to watch in terms of this getting put together. That's step 1 here, where I'm putting down my frame, trying to match the relationship or the ratio there. It's almost more of a square. This is still by Chardin, by the way, if anybody's interested. So there's my divisions. In terms of kind of bracketing out envelope, I'm looking at the top, pretty symmetrical picture. So I have the top of the handle. I can maybe make a big drop down to the, I don't know what this is, but that looks like maybe like a salt shaker or something. Who knows? On this side, down. And then as far as objects go, it's kind of up back through the egg. And then the handle on the, whatever that is. You can tell I don't spend a lot of time in the kitchen. Okay, so that's the envelope. I've kept it to 5 lines, so that's well within my basic edit. And now I'm going to start working through some plumb lines. And here I'm just going to start with the big base, or the big pot. And it looks to be a little bit easier to find because it's centered here. And so I kind of see that it's symmetrical over that horizontal and vertical line. This looks like where it lines up. So I'm using, in the last example, I started with a smaller element. I believe it was an orange, and then used it as a measuring principle to kind of find my way through the rest of the picture. Because this shape was a little bit easier for me to see, I started with this one. So there's really no right or wrong way to go about approaching this. And I'm going to go to this one over here. I see that this guy lines up just below half and would occupy about this much space. There is a little bit of room there to the side. So I'll leave this negative space, or I'm looking at that negative space. Since we're here, let's put in this table. There's a handle, comes out this way, very, very near to that edge. Like this. Still just using all straights for this stage. The eggs are kind of grouped in here, so I'm going to make just a rectangle, kind of a placeholder shape. There's this leading edge for the table, and then this salt shaker is right here, and it goes to about the halfway point on my overall base. Or I'm sorry, pot. So that's it. That's this stage, plumb lines. Now I'm going to start to do a little bit of work to break these down into my primitives. So let's get a slightly darker color so that we could see this a little bit stronger. And then we'll do a breakdown. So to kind of hurry some of this along so it doesn't wear on your attention, I'm just going to go ahead and put an ellipse here, instead of measuring out where that leading edge could be or is, but you can do that if it's helpful. It's trying to go for a little bit more speed. And then the bottom, this curves in, so it's going to add a little C curve to that straight line. Don't really see it on this side, and then the bottom is also kind of rounded. There is the handle here, just a bit of an angle. And then it goes back behind on that side. Salt shaker could be a combination of a few things. So here I'm gonna put a ball in the middle because it kind of has like a belly here. And then at the top it becomes more cylindrical. So we're gonna combine some forms. And these lines across are really useful just for interpreting the wraps. There's basically little ellipses. And then it narrows again to another cylinder. So I'll put a cylinder here, and then I'll just connect these with some curves. The goal in trying to see all these as primitives is so that when we come to light it, it's going to be easier to understand by way of thinking of one of the principles we discussed last week, which was just surfacing. This gets a little bit broader at the base, so maybe I'll do a straight and then a broader ellipse. And so it doesn't have to be perfect, just close enough. Eggs are basically ellipses. So I'm just kind of picking up where each one is placed, showing my overlaps, what's in front, what's behind. This one's behind both. Comes up only maybe about that high. And then for this pot here, there's an ellipse. Almost gets a little bit more cylindrical in the base. I'm just going to add two curves on either side to suggest that. And then this is basically just a cylinder sticking out of the top edge of it. And I'm going to build that base to the cylinder so it can feel that it attaches into the top lip there. Okay, we're essentially done with drawing now, right? I think that this is the review holdover from last week, just going over one more time so that everybody is comfortable with it. I think we learn best through repetition, but it is time to talk more so about painting and ideas related to painting. If you ever get lost in the painting, you can always come back to this. But now the goal is to, if you could get that one last check, just so I don't ignore the positive, negative shape where I'm thinking about, this space versus these. If I just do a quick kind of look through, I think I did a decent job, good enough that I'm comfortable moving forward. Right? So that's done. Now, in terms of lighting today, the things that I think are important for us to talk about or get through would be that, just a reminder of, so let's say this is step 6, we're going to break it into 4 different pieces that I think makes lighting more understandable, or at least these are things that you can take to help make sense of lighting if you're ever confused. It would be, even though it's still a holdover from drawing, just going through and being aware of your surfacing, the basic surfaces of the different objects, is absolutely crucial to knowing how lighting is going to work. And it's because light isn't arbitrary, or the light and shadow patterns are not arbitrary. They are only reflective, and so not reflective in the literal sense. But all lighting is just telling you the story of an object's surface. Right, so here this is just a surfacing line that's describing the different combinations of forms from top to bottom. If I go across this way, right, I get the same thing. This is just, these are abstract ideas of how an object turns. But one way we could describe value, the appearance of value is just an object changing direction and surface. Right, so that's all. In terms of value, we can explain all occurrences of light and shadow based on that. So knowing, this is why we're kind of discussing drawing in this way, is knowing the way that an object turns, or the quality of its surface, the direction, what it's a combination of. These are all things that are going to just make the light and shadow more manageable. So eggs, just being there. So that would be something that if you do feel like it benefits you in the course of a drawing, or the lay-in of a painting, or even if you want to revisit it, if you get lost in a certain point within the painting, is there. It's an available tool. After this, we really get more into principles or ideas of light. So when we talk about lighting, what we're talking about really to start us out is in the experience of light, there's two things that are taking place. There's the angle of light. So let's angle. And then there's also the direction of light. Here's direction. And I'm just going to make a little mock example at the bottom. Right, so let's say that we have in a side view here, let's pretend this is a side view, I have a cylinder. Cylinder is going to look just like a tower on the side because there's no perspective yet. So the first thing that we're looking at here is the angle of light. So imagine there's like just a pole here, could be like a street lamp or a spotlight with the light source at top. And so like a sun or a light. Now, why this is an important kind of demonstration in terms of being simple is that this doesn't, in terms of the light source, it doesn't always have to be here, right? You can have the angle of light be lower, right? And think of the times of day, how dusk and dawn shadows can get really long, but at noon, your shadow is just a little blob underneath you. So that'd be an example of the changing angle of light. You might even think of it as the height, right? The angle or height of the light. So we put that here. Now, when I'm thinking of how shadows work or what a shadow might be doing to an object, what I'm normally thinking about is, you could think of like a light projecting from here or a ray projecting from here, is that the direction of light is going to hit an object. So we could say it's hitting these outer points. And that when the object is in front of the light, like it is here, what you're going to always find is cast shadow, right? So as the angle of the light hits this object, the direction of the ground plane is the way that you would determine where that cast shadow will fall. So that cast shadow in this case would be this. So in this example, I'm looking at angle. What is the angle of light? And then what is the direction that light is falling on? Or other names for this would be the ground plane, right? Or the surface of the ground. If we look at that in a slightly different perspective, right, so let's take the same thing, but instead make it more 3/4. So let's change the camera angle. Now we're going to see on top. Here's our cylinder seen from above. This is our ground plane. This is the direction of the ground. And then I'm going to put my light back here. And let's put it really high up. So that's my sun. If I want to find the cast shadow, what I'm going to look to do is take this object and draw the light through the outermost edges. And then wherever that light ray hits my direction or ground plane, that's where my cast shadow is going to occur. So that happened right here. And then I could bring that back. And then what I would also add is, because I did just the outside edges and looking at this, I'd do one for the furthest edge as well. That's going to give me a little bit longer, so it's going to show the distortion. Right? And so that becomes my cast shadow. What you're also going to get in the object itself is a form shadow, right, which will divide this object into its light side and its shadow side. So these are the only three things that I want you thinking about when you start working on what it is that we're dealing with this week, which is developing a thumbnail. So the things that you're looking to get will be that are all implied in here. Let's get rid of this little example. I'll just label them over here. Things that I want you to find will be your light side, your shadow side, and your cast shadow. So if we just kind of add that into our simple example so far, right, hopefully you can see how some of this could be useful. So what am I seeing? I'm seeing cast shadows that are going in this direction. I see it there. I see it here for the kind of the pot, and then for the object there. So this is clearly the direction. It's the direction of the surface, or the direction of the ground. What would the angle of light be? If I just kind of, I can even work backwards in some cases. So the angle of light is relatively high, what I would say, because the shadows aren't super long. So that's a basic idea that you can use to help give your notion of how the effects of light and shadow are taking place some structure, right, or just some backbone, if it's a little bit confusing, just to figure out why things are there. If we give that like one more example, just for to reinforce the ideas. Let's say we're dealing with like a box, and since both of our examples were a cylinder and kind of a simpler perspective, let's say we're dealing with a box. So here's our perspective, or one of our basic primitives. And then let's say now that I want to create the same direction that we have there in our example. So I'm gonna draw through on this one just so I know where all the points are. And the direction is this way. So I'm taking this back corner here, this way. So here's my direction. And then my angle of light, let's just say it's, again, similar to what's in the picture. So I'm going to go through these points with my angle, and I'm going to keep the same one. This can be my angle, so let's label it one more time. Angle, direction. And by the way, the reason I'm kind of pointing these things out is a lot of the times in paintings, the reason that a painted scene or a thumbnail might look off, or it might look confused, or like it doesn't kind of all sit together, is often these two things, that the angle of the light or the direction of the ground plane isn't consistent between all of the objects in a scene. So that's one angle. Let's do one for this point, and that's going to the second. Oh, that's not very good. So you can see I need to practice more ghosting. Okay, so that's going here, here, and then one more parallel angle here. And so this tells me the shape of my cast shadow, because it's kind of plotted to those points. So this tool of angle and direction can be useful if you have a difficult time discerning what your cast shadow should be. Hopefully by now you're able to kind of break the ideas of the primitives down, and this should give you some security in knowing that if you get stuck with an object, you can break it into its component parts and then find its cast shadow. So that's one thing, cast shadow. The other thing is form shadow. And so on a box, if this plane is facing away, it's going to be in shadow. So I know in this one that my cast shadow is here, and that my form shadow is there. Form shadow just meaning the part of the object that's not facing light. That part of the form's in shadow. Okay, so that's just one final example there in terms of getting that light angle and direction to make sense. So let's plot that over here now. So on this, let's work from left to right. On this salt shaker, I already kind of did it, right? So I kind of copied down the forms when I was making this surfacing line. And what I'm looking at there is that core shadow, right, where that object is darkest. This is one way that you could start this process too, is like finding that really strong divide between light and shadow on your object. I understand for this one the direction of the surface, the tabletop. And what I see, but let's say I'm having a difficult time making sense of the cast shadow because it looks a little blobby. If I think I know the direction of the light, I can use this, just like I did with the box, to help point out some corners. And then from there, I'll just map the direction and kind of do my best to give that same distorted idea of shape. So the cast shadow is always going to be distorted. It's the object's shape, but compromised against that flat surface of the ground, or whatever surface it is. So that gives me my cast shadow and my form shadow shape. So now I have three. And that's what you're going to expect to get with most every object: light, shadow, cast shadow. If I do it on the big pot, I see this is a little difficult because there's some surface changes, like this is a reflective surface. See if you can, for now, just ignore that. But I'm seeing the same thing. There's a break here. That's my form shadow line. So I have shadow, light, and then I don't see much of its cast shadow. It's kind of back here. Some of it might be going over the pot, but it's hard to make out. I see a little bit of the cast shadow, so we think of the same kind of angle or directional lines. Think of how they hit the bottom, and I'm seeing a little bit of the cast shadow down here. So this much, and then it's going to go with the direction. So going with that surface. And so that would be the break between the light and the shadow for the bottom of the pot. For the eggs, all surfacing lines. So these are all going to be curved. So like on this egg, I see a line like that. So light side, shadow side. Let's get a little bit closer, since these are harder to see. This one looks like this. And this one, just a curve. Their cast shadows do the same thing. So if I pull back, I see them going, or really only this one, this direction, and then it kind of curves back and joins the cast shadow of the smaller pot. Smaller pot's cast shadow, I can see it here, so I'm just going to create that shape, go straight with that direction. And then as far as the cylinder goes, there's a form shadow here. Comes down. This lip creates a bit of a cast shadow. That's what that is. And then it becomes a form shadow here. So that's how I would subdivide a drawing to start this next stage, which is exclusively thinking about value. And you're very near to leaving drawing behind entirely. So next thing I want to do in terms of making sense, or best how to simplify what it is that we're working with, is I want to think about just a value scale. And hopefully I'm not going to have you make one, but I am going to create one over here so that I can express how I use it practically. So let's say we have a value scale with the lightest value on this side. We'll have 10 be the darkest value on this side. And then I'm going to turn off on my brush now anything that would be pressure sensitivity. Right? Because when I do this stage, I don't want there to be a lot of inconsistency in lights and darks. Right? So let's say we have, and then the value scale, the easiest way to kind of create this would just be to do a little bit of blending here. And I might have to turn some back on just for a second, just to get our blends. Okay, good enough. It just basically gives us the impression here that we're having a gradation. That's all we're looking for. Okay, so the basic idea now with our value scale is a few things. When I'm creating thumbnails, you're just looking for the simplest idea of how values create a graphic statement in your image. And this may seem kind of simple or remedial, but in terms of painting, this is the most important aspect to an image. And it's one of those that commonly gets lost for detail, right? Or because we have or at least I have a propensity to kind of commit too early to the details. So the first thing I'm thinking about when using my value scale and trying to interpret how to fill in these different areas, what values I should give to each, is that I think about the home value of each, right? So, when I'm looking at an object, like the salt shaker, for example, its home value would be the inherent value of that object without light and shadow. So if you took away the light and the shadow and just imagine that object without, right? So that would also be kind of in that area. I want to place what that value is. So in terms of my overall value scale, when I'm mixing paint, I'll be thinking about the same thing. This is my value 5, right in the middle. And I kind of use that as a gauge, right? So I'm thinking about a 10 value scale. 3 would be here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 here. So I'm trying to imagine where that lines up. For me, that would be maybe, let's say, 3 or 4. It's about in that area. And so that's the first thing that I'm always thinking. Now, in order to start painting, I have to consider, after my home value, what the intensity of the light source is. Right, so this would be step 1, to arrive at the light and shadow values or how to assign them. What is the light source? Is it super bright? Is it muted, like a candle? Is it a hot spotlight? Is it an overcast day? Right? Light has a lot of potential to communicate differences in, let's just say, story. Right? There's all kinds of types of light. Here it seems to be pretty weak, maybe candlelit, but it's not a really dominant light. So I always assign to my light, once I decide that, a certain plus or minus. So if it's candle, what it's going to do to my value 4 is it's going to do +1 in the light side. It's going to raise it by 1. And in the shadow, it's going to drop it by 1. And this is just a way for me to start to imagine or have a theory to work my way into the bigger ideas. So if this starts out at a 4, it's going to go to a 3 in the light and to a 5 in the shadow. If I can decide that, then I'll just start to paint it in. I'm never really going to know if I'm right until I get everything up here working. But you can see now this is how my light side would work. My shadow side is going to be 5. I'm just looking to fill in this side. And what we should hopefully end up with is the idea of a form that shows light and shadow, because in painting what we're doing is painting the effect of light. We're not painting objects so much as light. The cast shadow itself, I think, gets a little bit darker than the 5. Right? So let's say it's a 6 here, and that's it. So I'm going to do that, or I would do that for every object or every area of the painting. If we do that for the background, right? So sometimes, I started here with the salt shaker just because it was my example. But a lot of the times in the image, I start with what the easiest value to see is, and then I try to build around that. Kind of like what I did with the drawing. I start with something that's easier to find, and then from there we work into things that might be a little bit more difficult. And just because I don't want to get too far off of our list, let's just fill in some of these other things. After lighting, where we explain the angle and direction, the third step was thinking about home values. So just to give you one more, right? So the home value of the egg is clearly 1. The home value of this pot is closer to 5. The home value of the background might start out as a 4 because it's slightly lighter than the pot. The home value of this pot here is more like a 8 or a 9 because it's really dark to start out. After that, the last thing is breaking every object into a light side versus a shadow, and if there is one, a cast shadow shape. So that's it. That's really it as far as what I'm working on this week in this step. If you can get this, that's the backbone of every painting. It's the architecture of every painting. Let's fill in the rest. So I said that background. Background might start out as a 4. I'm using that same idea of the light source. So it's going to be gradually a little bit darker on this side. Oh, it's the light. I'm sorry, a little dark. Here. The thumbnails, so when you do them this week, the goal is going to be to use the largest brush possible. So I always paint with a larger brush because part of the drawing now is moving shape and juxtaposing value. So if you're in here with a real noodle brush, a real tiny kind of like detail-oriented brush, it's going to be a deterrent, right? You're going to be wanting to render instead of setting up your big blocks of value. But think of these as like cardboard cutouts, like a construction paper. And what you're looking to get early on in the painting is just these set one against the other. In terms of composition, something again that we'll continue to talk more about later, this is the stage in the painting that gives the graphic read. And so all paintings rely on this. This is what draws in a viewer from distance. 10, 20 feet back, and then the detail or the rendering later is what will reward them for getting up close. This value, which I kind of use to show the light side of the background, is pretty similar to me to this tabletop. So I'm just going to come in here with the same. Doesn't have to be these shapes perfect to start out. You just want to get them all up and working as quickly as possible. It's kind of like a puzzle too, right? So this, seeing this darker value down here is similar to that of the wall. So I'm just going to lay in this big shape. I'm trying not to treat this in a way that's at all careful, just getting these shapes up and working. And now let's do the pot. So I think that's, when I look at this value against the background, it looks a little bit lighter to me. So I see it closer to this value. Here. So I'm going to go over my drawing. And I see this value, because I said the pot was a 4, so 2 steps might be a 5 or a 6 on this side. I'm going to group this shape in with the top there. I kind of lose the background there, so that could tell me one of two things. Maybe I need to pull this shape over some, so this reads a little bit more. And that's something I would do when we start to kind of blend it out. But I think at this stage what you also get is the purest representation of the painting's design. And look at how the value is being used here asymmetrically. Like on this side I have a dark that's dominant to the left side, and that's counterbalanced by a light on this side. And then look how this pot just flips it. Dark on this side, light on this side. Right? So there's a lot of design that happens early on here that I think makes painting pleasing, or at least attractive to an audience. And then when this is set up, we can have as much fun as we want, kind of really getting in here and finalizing the render details of different areas. This is my darkest area. As far as I can see, this part of the pot. So I'm thinking of this as, it starts out at maybe a value 6. So lighter would be a 5. So 1 up for the light. And then 1 down for the dark, so 7. So that could be there. The handle and kind of the brim of or the lip of the pot are closer to this value. So that would be more of a value 5. So I'm going to paint this in here. Just focusing on shape now. And then the eggs, I don't really have to do much to their light value, their light side. It's just the cast shadow side. So if it's a value 1, that's the home value, value 1. Then I'm going to go down 1 for the shadow. So it's in 2 or 3. So that's a pretty light value there for those eggs. I'm just kind of filling those in. If we want, we could, let's pull out that light and give these a easier read so there's no line in the way. That's one in the back. Here's the one in the front. And then this cast shadow over here, I think it's going to be the same as that. This is a darker shadow. Kind of blends in with that pot there. And then we're done. So this would be the basic idea of a thumbnail. It says everything you need about your image that people almost always neglect. And later we can come back in, and this will be more of how we develop the painting or bring out the rendering. But we'll soften these with edges when we get there. That'll be next week. And talk about creating focal points through rendering. But if it makes more sense to see it this way too, hopefully it makes sense to you how we got to this point with the drawing. Right? So if we kind of just keep that opacity a little bit lower, the drawing helps facilitate the understanding of the shadows and the basic shapes that I made of them, the arrangement of the picture, where things went in the overall scheme of things. So this is one example. I'm going to do a couple more just to help you make sense of what's going on and how to take this into the realm of homework. Because though we've been using so much examples of just still lives and paintings, I want to do one that's slightly different. I'm going to do a couple examples from a film or a movie still, just to show you how these same principles apply. Once that's done, then we're going to take this right into painting and have our first kind of paint demo.